London, 1814. Rain fell not as a blessing but as a sentence, thin, relentless, whispering over slate roofs and the polished boots of gentlemen who never looked down. Threadneedle Street gleamed with damp reflections, carriage wheels slicing through puddles, parasols flashing like dark wings, ribbons trailing behind women who had never known hunger. Beneath the dripping eaves of a bakery stood Eliza Harcourt, 22, pale and composed though her gloves were torn. She had been walking since dawn, each knock upon a stranger's door dulling something sacred inside her. Once her name had opened parlors and invitations, now it closed them. The scent of roasted chestnuts mingled with coal smoke, the city's perfume of survival. Eliza pressed her hand against her stomach to quiet its protest and fixed her bonnet against the wind. Another house awaited, a cream-colored facade with brass knocker and marble steps. She rehearsed the line she had spoken a dozen times that morning. "Good day, madam, I seek a position of service." Always polite, never desperate. Dignity was the only dowry she had left. She climbed the steps, heart measured and small, and knocked. A servant opened halfway, eyes sliding over her soaked hem. "No vacancies," he muttered before she could speak. The door clicked shut. She stood there for a moment, the rain pooling at her feet. Through the window, laughter rose, a group of young ladies giggling as they embroidered near the fire. Eliza's throat tightened. Once, she too had embroidered tulips while her father read dispatches from Spain. Once, she had been Colonel Harcourt's daughter, not a burden to be dismissed. By the time she reached the next street, her parasol had given up entirely, its spine broken like a wounded bird. A carriage thundered past, splattering her skirts with mud. She flinched, then straightened. No one noticed. That, perhaps, was the cruelest part of ruin, not the hunger but the invisibility. She tried another door, then another. Each rejection was quieter than the last until her own voice seemed foreign to her. At midday she rested by a chapel gate, trembling fingers tracing the iron filigree. The bells tolled, muffled by rain. She whispered a prayer, not for deliverance but for endurance. Her father had died with debts on his name and honor on his tongue. Her mother's ring, pawned. Her friends, silent. London, in its silks and sermons, had no memory for the fallen. From across the street came a familiar voice, sharp, perfumed, unmistakable. "Lady Melbrook." Eliza turned. 3 women exited a milliner's shop, their laughter light and poisonous. "Is that Miss Harcourt?" one asked, loud enough for the rain to carry. "I heard she begs for work." "Poor dear, perhaps she could polish boots at Almack's." Their laughter rang like silver spoons dropped on marble. Eliza met their gaze once, said nothing and walked away. Behind her, the world blurred into gray and carriage smoke. Yet even humiliation, she thought, cannot drown a heartbeat. The street narrowed into poorer quarters where the air smelled of tallow and wet stone. She paused at a small dressmaker's shop, its window fogged, the sign faded. A chance, perhaps. Inside, a thin woman bent over a sewing table. "I can embroider, hem, or assist with fittings," Eliza said softly. "I ask for no lodging, only wages enough for bread." The woman studied her, sodden gown, blue lips, those careful manners that did not belong here. Pity flickered, then fear of gossip extinguished it. "I cannot risk the clientele, miss. The gentry do not like reminders of their own fall." Eliza thanked her anyway. Outside again, the rain had turned to a curtain. Her limbs felt carved from ice. She thought of her father's portrait, sold last winter, and wondered whether anyone had kept the frame polished. Evening crept through the fog, lanterns blooming along the thoroughfare. The city's hum softened into the hush before night, when even beggars retreated to archways. Eliza's steps slowed near a row of stately mansions. The last house at the corner drew her gaze, a high gate of black iron, intricate and solemn. Behind it, torches flickered in stone sconces, and above the door, carved letters, "Wynthorpe House." The name stirred a rumor in her memory. The Duke of Wynthorpe, a recluse, they said. The most feared man in Mayfair. Cold as granite, rich as sin. Some whispered he had killed for love, others that he had no heart left to kill with. Eliza hesitated. A servant swept rainwater from the steps, glancing at her once before vanishing inside. She almost laughed at her own audacity. What could she possibly seek from such a man? Yet exhaustion has its own courage. She approached the gate, her shoes sinking in the mud. The knock she gave was soft, hesitant. It echoed through the mist like a question too long unanswered. No reply. She waited, breath misting the air. Finally, the door opened a fraction, revealing a tall figure in black, broad-shouldered, unsmiling. "Yes." His voice was low, clipped, and strangely precise. Her throat caught. I am seeking employment, your grace. Any respectable position will suffice. The pause that followed was not contempt but calculation, as if he weighed not her words but her spirit. Then, almost quietly, no one has ever knocked here for that reason. She flushed. Then I apologize. I did not mean to intrude. Most intrusions are unintentional, he murmured. His eyes, pale gray under the brim of his hat, studied her face with unsettling steadiness. You are cold. Sit inside a moment. Before she could protest, a footman appeared, guiding her through the doorway. Warmth struck her like sunlight. Firelight spilled across marble, glinting on portraits of long-dead ancestors. The scent of sandalwood filled the hall. She had stepped into another world, one built from everything she had lost. The Duke removed his gloves with deliberate slowness. You fainted once already today, he said. I would not have it happen again under my roof. How do you, she began, but dizziness blurred her vision. The floor tilted and she caught the banister with trembling hands. I see, he murmured. Rest there. The rain has undone you. A long silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, her breath unsteady. She tried to thank him, but the word grace died on her tongue. He stood near the hearth, half in shadow, his gaze fixed not on her but on the flames, as if they were the only thing left worth studying. Outside, the rain continued its endless prayer over London's rooftops. Inside, the most feared man in England watched a ruined gentlewoman tremble before his fire, and something in the air shifted, an almost imperceptible tilt, like a door opening in a long-sealed house. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, roughened by thought. Miss Harcourt, he said, though she had not given her name. If you are seeking a position, I might have one. But it is not the kind you imagine. Her eyes lifted to meet his, confusion mingling with fear. The thunder rolled overhead and he stepped closer, the light catching the edge of his scar. I have a job for you, the Duke of Wynthorpe said evenly. Be my wife. The room was silent but for the slow hiss of the hearth and the faint ticking of a distant clock. Eliza Harcourt sat upright in the carved chair where the Duke of Wynthorpe had placed her, her damp skirts leaving a dark ring upon the rug. She was afraid to move. The air here did not invite comfort, it commanded stillness. The Duke, tall and grave, stood before the window, his silhouette etched against the rain-streaked glass like a shadow carved in obsidian. For a moment he said nothing, only removed his coat with military precision and handed it to a waiting servant. When he turned toward her, the fire revealed the faint line of a scar along his temple, an old wound, perhaps from war, perhaps from something less noble. His face was severe but not unhandsome. He regarded her as though she were a riddle he had not yet decided to solve. You may speak now, he said. I do not understand you, your grace, she murmured. You cannot mean what you said. He paced once, the sound of his boots deliberate on the polished floor. I rarely say what I do not mean. Eliza's voice trembled though she fought to steady it. Marriage is not employment. In most of London, he replied, it is precisely that. The simplicity of his tone startled her more than cruelty would have. He poured a measure of brandy into a crystal glass and held it to the firelight, watching it glow like amber blood. I require a wife, he continued. Not a companion, not a mistress. A wife. The law demands one before I may claim the estates tied to my title. My late father's will was explicit. A duchess by spring or the land reverts to distant cousins who would turn Wynthorpe into a gaming hall. And so, she said quietly, you would purchase obedience. I would purchase peace. The way he said it, flat, exhausted, made her ache in spite of herself. The rumors of his cruelty had not prepared her for this strange calm, this man who spoke of marriage as one might speak of a treaty after a war gone wrong. She stood, her composure trembling. Your Grace, I am not suited to such an arrangement. I am ruined enough by circumstance, let me not be ruined by folly. He looked at her then truly looked. The fire cast her face in hues of gold and sorrow. Miss Harcourt, he said slowly, I am offering you protection. You will have a home, servants, and an allowance. In return you must bear my name and play your part before society. There will be no expectation beyond civility. It is a business of necessity. Her fingers clenched around the edge of her shawl. You speak as though feeling were a disease. Feeling, he said, kills men faster than bullets. I have had my share of both. The weight of those words hung between them, a quiet confession buried in ice. She wondered what wound the world had dealt him to make him speak so. I could not deceive the world so brazenly, she whispered. You deceive no one, he replied. You survive. She almost laughed, but it came out like a sigh. And if I refuse? Then you may continue to knock on doors until one opens. Perhaps the rain will be kinder by then. The cruelty of the truth struck deeper than insult. He meant no mockery, he simply did not believe in mercy. Eliza turned toward the fire. The warmth bit at her soaked hem, releasing the scent of wet wool. If I were to agree, she said at last, what would become of me after? His gaze softened almost imperceptibly. You would remain the Duchess of Wynthorpe in name and comfort, free of interference. You may fill your days as you please. Paint, read, keep to the gardens, so long as you keep the mask intact. Why me? He set down his glass. Because you asked for work, not charity. Because you did not faint from fear when I opened the door. And because London will believe I am capable of marrying a beggar before they believe I could love again. The last words slipped out unguarded. She caught them the way one catches the truth behind a man's armor. You loved once, she said softly. He did not answer. Instead, he walked toward a portrait half shrouded in shadow. A young woman's face stared down from the canvas, dark-haired, smiling faintly. The resemblance to Eliza was distant yet undeniable. My late fiancée, he said. Lady Cassandra Vale. She died 6 years ago. How? He did not look away from the portrait. A fall from her horse. They called it an accident. I called it consequence. Something in his tone suggested more than guilt. It was exile, self-imposed and absolute. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. The world believes you killed a man for her. The world believes many things, he replied. Belief costs them nothing. He faced her again and the iron mask returned. You may refuse me tonight, Miss Harcourt, but you will not find safety elsewhere. London has teeth. A log shifted in the fire, sending a spray of sparks into the air. She thought of the cold streets outside, of the laughter that followed her name, of her father's portrait pawned for bread. The house felt like a cage and a sanctuary both. What would you have me say? She murmured. Say you will consider. And if I do? Then tomorrow morning, a carriage will take you to Wynthorpe Hall. You will be fitted, instructed, and presented to the world as my intended. For a time their mockery will amuse them. Then it will bore them. And boredom, he said with something like a ghost of a smile, is the closest thing to peace society ever grants. Her pulse quickened. And you, your grace? What do you gain besides land? An end to questions. He walked past her to the door and paused. The candlelight flickered across his scar, making it seem like a wound that still breathed. You may sleep here tonight. The servants will see to your comfort. I cannot stay under your roof unwed, she said. Then call it employment, he replied. Until you decide whether to accept the offer. She watched him leave, his steps fading down the long corridor. Alone, she turned toward the portrait again. Lady Cassandra's painted eyes seemed almost kind. Eliza's hands trembled as she reached for the fire's warmth. The crackle of embers filled the silence where her thoughts should have been. To marry for survival, to live among ghosts, was that truly worse than disappearing altogether? She rose, crossing to the window. Outside the rain had stopped. Fog drifted along the garden wall, veiling the world beyond the iron gates. Somewhere in that mist, a carriage waited with the crest of Wynthorpe gleaming faintly on its door. She pressed her palm to the glass, heart steady now. For the first time since her father's death, she felt not despair but a strange, dangerous calm. Perhaps this too was a kind of courage. Behind her, from the hallway, his voice carried low and distant. She will accept, the Duke murmured to someone unseen. She must. No one else would dare. And though Eliza could not hear him clearly, the words seemed to ripple through the silence like the promise of a storm not yet spent. The invitation arrived on heavy cream paper, its edges gilded, its seal marked with the crest of the Melbrooks, a family that measured worth by whispers. Eliza turned it over in her gloved hands as if it might burn her. It was not meant as an honor. It was a summons to spectacle. In the week since the Duke of Wynthorpe had announced their engagement, London had erupted into gossip. The Ton had not seen the Duke in 6 years, and when he finally appeared, it was not with a debutante or a widow, but with a woman whose shoes still remembered rain. The night of the ball arrived draped in frost. Wynthorpe's carriage waited outside the townhouse, lanterns flickering on the cobblestones. Inside, Eliza stood before a mirror in a borrowed gown the color of pale lilac. The seamstress had been discreet, though she could not hide the mended hem. Her hands shook as she fastened the single pearl at her throat. Behind her, the Duke observed in silence. His attire was immaculate, black tailcoat, white cravat, a single silver pin that gleamed like restraint itself. "You look well," he said at last. Eliza gave a faint, ironic smile. "Like a charity exhibit?" "Like a woman who knows she is being tested," he replied. "Hold your head high. They are predators of boredom, not blood." The carriage jolted forward. London passed in blurs of lamplight and snowmelt. Neither spoke for a long while. Eliza watched the city retreat beyond the window and thought of the line she had crossed, from hunger to opulence, yet never further from belonging. The Melbrook mansion loomed like a cathedral to vanity. Within, the air shimmered with perfume and chandeliers. The orchestra played a waltz too elegant to be sincere. All conversation ceased when they entered. The crowd parted as though a ghost had arrived. Adrian Blackmoor, Duke of Wynthorpe, once the terror of drawing rooms, now standing beside a woman no one could place in the genealogies of the titled. "Smile?" he murmured. "I would rather breathe," she whispered back. They moved through the crowd like a storm in its eye. Lady Melbrook swept forward, all jewels and false sweetness. "Your Grace, how extraordinary to see you," she crooned. "And this must be, oh, how shall I address her?" Eliza inclined her head with measured grace. "Miss Harcourt for now. The wedding is yet to come." The lady's smile froze, brittle as glass. "How refreshing." A ripple of laughter stirred at the edges of the room. Conversations turned, folded, and began again, all pretending to discuss the orchestra while dissecting the woman on the Duke's arm. Eliza could feel the gaze of every chandelier, every feathered fan concealing a smirk. She wanted to shrink, but his hand remained lightly upon hers, steady, grounding, unmistakably protective. "Do not hide," he murmured under his breath. "They feed on retreat." "I am trying to be invisible," she said. "Impossible," he replied. "You are too alive for that." His tone was not flirtation but recognition, and it unsettled her more than cruelty would have. A young viscount approached, bowing with the kind of smile reserved for mischief. "Your Grace," he said, "I must congratulate you on your pragmatism. A bold choice indeed." Adrian's jaw flexed. "Boldness and necessity are close cousins," he said, "though one requires wit to tell them apart." The viscount paled and retreated. Eliza stifled a nervous laugh. "You have a talent for terrifying people." He glanced at her. "Only when they deserve it." The evening unspooled in fragments of humiliation wrapped in civility. Every compliment was a blade. Every dance a performance. When the orchestra struck another waltz, Adrian offered his hand. "I do not dance well," she warned. "Then we will offend together," he said. He guided her onto the floor. For a moment the world stilled. The waltz carried them through a halo of candlelight. She felt the weight of his palm at her waist, the strength beneath his restraint. His movements were precise, mechanical almost, yet when their eyes met, something human flickered there, a hesitation, a forgotten warmth. "You have not danced in years?" she whispered. "I have not needed to," he answered. The music swelled, and for a heartbeat, London's mockery fell away. They moved not as bargain and benefactor but as two exiles orbiting one fragile reprieve. When the music ended, applause scattered politely. Then came the whisper, sharp, deliberate, and cruel. "Perhaps she reminds him of Cassandra." Eliza froze. The name slid through the air like a dagger. Cassandra, the dead fiancée. The ghost that had never left him. Adrian's grip tightened. His expression did not change, but his voice, when it came, could have cut glass. "If you must speak of the dead, Lady Melbrook, at least have the decency to whisper to the grave." Silence rippled through the ballroom. The lady's fan trembled in her hand. No one spoke after that. The orchestra resumed, shakily, as if fearful to draw his gaze again. Eliza exhaled only when they reached the carriage outside. Her pulse still drummed in her ears. Snow had begun to fall, slow, delicate, as though the sky sought to apologize for men's cruelty. "I did not mean to shame you," she said quietly, "by being what I am." "You have shamed no one," he replied. "They did that themselves." The carriage wheels turned over the wet cobbles. For a while, only the rhythmic sound filled the silence between them. "You knew they would mock me," she said. "I knew they would test you," he corrected. "I wished to see if you would break." She looked at him, half in disbelief. "And?" He turned toward her, the faintest trace of something like admiration in his eyes. "You did not." Her laughter was soft and weary. "It was not courage, Your Grace. It was exhaustion. One cannot bleed forever." He studied her, his face unreadable. "Exhaustion," he murmured, "is what remains when pride refuses to die." For the first time she saw him not as marble but as man, a figure carved by loss, sustained by habit. The monster of rumor was simply someone who had forgotten gentleness could still exist. When they reached Wynthorpe's townhouse, he offered his hand to help her down. The gesture was formal, yet his fingers lingered a fraction longer than propriety allowed. She felt the warmth through her gloves, startling and real. Inside, the servants vanished like shadows. The fire had been lit, throwing amber light across the hall. Eliza paused near the staircase, the echoes of the ballroom still clinging to her. "You defended me," she said softly. "Why?" He removed his coat without looking at her. "Because they were wrong." "About what?" He glanced up, his voice low. "About who you remind me of." She met his eyes. "And who is that, Your Grace?" His lips parted as if to speak, but then he looked away, choosing silence over confession. "It grows late. Rest, Miss Harcourt. Tomorrow society will have new prey." She hesitated, searching his face for something she could not name. "You are kind when you wish not to be. And cruel when I must be," he replied. When she finally climbed the stairs, she could feel his gaze follow her, steady and unspoken. At the landing she turned back. He was still there, half in shadow, his expression unreadable. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the city in ghostly quiet. Somewhere within the storm of London's gossip, the first rumor of a love match began to bloom. But in the stillness of Wynthorpe House, the Duke stood alone before the dying fire, staring at the flames as if they whispered a name he no longer dared to remember. The first warmth of spring had touched the hills of Derbyshire when Eliza arrived at Wynthorpe Hall, now her home in name if not yet in heart. The great manor stood against the evening light like a wounded fortress, its stones blackened by age, its windows glowing faintly with firelight. The engagement had become official. The wedding only days away. Yet within the walls, silence ruled as faithfully as any monarch. Servants spoke in whispers. The Duke himself kept to his library, pacing like a man walking through old ruins only he could see. Eliza moved through the echoing halls with cautious reverence. Her footsteps followed the rhythm of the rain outside, soft and uncertain. She had learned the language of Wynthorpe, the creak of its stairs, the hush of tapestries that had seen centuries, the way the Duke's study door closed with finality when he wished for solitude. She never intruded, but she listened. She saw the candle burning through each night beneath his door. On the third evening, the household prepared for guests from London, Adrian's solicitors, his distant cousins, and the vicar who would officiate the hasty union. The staff bustled, the chandeliers blazed, yet beneath the splendor lay tension. One of the cousins, Lord Hale, laughed too loudly over dinner, toasting the redemption of the Duke's cursed hall. Adrian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Eliza, seated at his right, felt the tremor beneath the table as his hand gripped his cane. She placed her gloved hand upon his wrist, a quiet plea for peace. His eyes flickered toward her, and for a fleeting moment the storm inside him seemed to still. After the meal, the guests retired to the drawing room. Eliza excused herself, wandering toward the gallery. Portraits of past Wynthorpes lined the walls, men carved in pride, women in silk and composure. At the end hung Cassandra's likeness, the late fiancée. The painter had captured her smiling faintly, as if the world had never denied her anything. Beneath the portrait stood an open window. The curtains swayed in the draught, carrying the faint scent of smoke. She frowned. The smell thickened, wood resin heat. Then came a shout from below. Fire. The West Wing. Her heart seized. She turned and ran. Flames had caught in the drapery along the corridor, fed by a knocked-over lantern. Servants rushed with buckets, shouting orders that dissolved into panic. The blaze crackled like an angry god, spreading faster than reason. Eliza. The Duke's voice thundered from the far hall. He appeared through the haze, coat half-buttoned, eyes sharp with command. Get out. Now. There are still people upstairs, she cried. The housekeeper's boy, he went to fetch linens. Damn the boy, he snapped, but she was already running past him. The stairwell glowed red. Smoke clawed at her lungs, yet she pressed on, calling out until she heard the faint sob near the upper corridor. A child huddled beside a burning door, terrified and trapped. Eliza tore off her shawl, wrapped it over her face and lifted him into her arms. The heat seared her hands, the child clung to her neck, coughing. The floorboards trembled beneath their weight. Miss Harcourt. Adrian's voice cut through the chaos. He appeared at the top of the stairs, his form framed in flame. For an instant, he looked like the devil every rumor had painted him to be, wild, commanding, alive with fury. Give me the boy. She stumbled toward him. He seized them both, covering her with his coat as the ceiling groaned and split. Together they crashed down the stairs, the world a blur of smoke and splintering oak. Outside, rain began to fall, hissing against the inferno. Servants dragged buckets from the well. Neighbors arrived with blankets. Adrian held Eliza close as the boy was carried away to safety. Her gown was singed, her hair tangled, her hands raw. Yet she looked up at him through the soot and smiled faintly. "You fool," he whispered hoarsely. "You could have died." "I was already half dead before this house took me in," she murmured. "At least now I've something worth the risk." The word struck him deeper than the smoke. He turned away as if afraid the fire inside him would burn next. For years he had lived behind walls, stone, pride, guilt, but she had walked straight through them with nothing but courage. When the last flames were smothered, the west wing lay in ruin. Blackened beams jutted like bones against the night sky. The portraits were gone, Cassandra's smile consumed in ash. Adrian stood amid the wreckage, rain streaking his face. Eliza joined him, wrapping a blanket around his shoulders. "This house has always wanted to burn," he said quietly. "Perhaps it has finally freed itself." She touched his arm. "Then let us build something new upon its ashes." He looked at her, truly looked. The woman who had entered his life as necessity now stood before him as something sacred. Her hair clung damply to her cheeks, her eyes alive with exhaustion and grace. He reached up, brushing soot from her brow with a tenderness that startled even him. "You are not what I expected," he said. "Nor are you, Your Grace." He exhaled a sound halfway between a laugh and a confession. "I married for inheritance," he murmured. "But if there is any mercy left in this cursed estate, I will stay for love." She searched his face, uncertain whether to believe him. "You should rest," she said softly. "And you?" "I will stay until the fire dies completely." The rain fell harder, drumming against the scorched earth. In the distance, the chapel bell tolled midnight. Around them, the servants worked in silence, and for the first time since his father's death, Adrian joined them. He tore at the smoldering timbers with bare hands, his fine coat blackened, his title forgotten. Eliza watched him, a man stripped of every mask, and felt something fierce awaken in her chest. This was not the feared Duke of Rumor but the wounded soldier she had glimpsed beneath. Perhaps, she thought, every man must burn once before he learns to love. As dawn approached, the sky bruised to gray. The worst of the flames had surrendered. The hall still stood, scarred but unbroken. Adrian turned toward her, smoke curling between them like memory. "When I first saw you at my door," he said quietly, "I thought you fragile. And now I know better. You are fire disguised as grace." She smiled faintly, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Then take care, Your Grace. Fire consumes what it loves." He stepped closer, the faintest trace of a smile at his mouth. "So it does." The first light of morning crept over the ruined estate, touching the ashes where Cassandra's portrait had hung. The fire was out, yet the air still trembled with heat and promise. And as the servants knelt to clear the debris, the Duke turned toward the chapel on the hill. "Prepare it," he said to his steward. "We will marry tomorrow." The morning after the fire broke soft and pale, as though the heavens themselves wished not to disturb what had survived. Wynthorpe Hall stood cloaked in mist, its scorched stones breathing faint threads of smoke. The ruins smelled of rain and rebirth. Eliza Harcourt, no Eliza Blackmoor now, stood upon the terrace in her wedding gown, her fingers trembling around a bouquet of white heather. It was not the wedding London had envisioned. No orchestra, no diamond tiara, no procession of carriages, only the wind in the chapel's broken eaves, the Duke's solemn vow, and the faint murmur of water dripping through stone. Yet, as she repeated the words "to honor and keep," she felt them burn with a truth stronger than any altar gold could hold. Adrian slipped the ring upon her soot-marked hand, his touch reverent. The world seemed to still, the hall's ravens silent, the servants bowed like parishioners. When the vicar closed his book, the Duke's gaze lingered on her, uncertain, reverent, almost afraid. For the first time in 6 years, the air around him was unguarded. Later, when the guests were gone and the rain had given way to sunlight, they stood together in the ruined west wing. The ashes glittered like black diamonds. "We will rebuild it," she said quietly. "Not as it was, but as it should have been." He studied her profile against the light. "And how should it be?" "With windows that open," she answered. "So nothing ever smothers in silence again." He almost smiled. "A duchess with opinions, my ancestors will turn in their graves." "Let them," she said. "We live for the living." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time the weight he carried seemed to ease. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known." "That is precisely why you found me," she murmured. The following weeks passed like pages in a book written by gentler hands. Workmen arrived, scaffolds rose. The countryside buzzed with gossip, half disbelief, half admiration. The beggar-turned-duchess had become a legend whispered over teacups and supper tables. But inside Wynthorpe Hall, life settled into something quiet and human. Eliza oversaw the repairs herself, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair bound in a ribbon. Adrian watched her from the balcony, struck by the strange alchemy of her presence. How she could move among dust and ruin yet make everything seem reborn. In the evenings they dined in the small library instead of the grand hall. He began to speak again, not as a duke but as a man. He told her of his years abroad after Cassandra's death, the duels fought, the nights spent waiting for a dawn that never came. She listened, not with pity but understanding. "You mistake grief for loyalty," she said once. "Loyalty belongs to the living." He had no reply. Only the faint touch of his hand over hers as the fire crackled between them. By midsummer, a painter from Bath was commissioned to capture her likeness for the family gallery. Eliza had protested, "I am no ornament," but Adrian insisted. "It is not ornament," he said. "It is remembrance." The sitting took place in the morning room, the air rich with the scent of lilacs. She wore no jewels, only the scarred hands that had pulled a child from the fire and a calm that could not be staged. The painter worked in silence until the final stroke. "She will outlast the canvas," he said softly. Adrian agreed. When the portrait was unveiled weeks later, the household gathered in the restored hall. There she stood upon the wall, the Duchess of Wynthorpe, not adorned but luminous, eyes steady, posture poised in quiet defiance. The faint gleam of the wedding ring was the only gold upon her. The servants murmured admiration. Adrian said nothing. He simply touched the edge of the frame as if anchoring himself to its truth. That night they walked together through the gardens. Lanterns flickered among the roses, the air smelled of earth after rain. She paused beneath the great oak where the fire sparks had once flown. "You never told me," she said, "why you truly asked me to be your wife." He hesitated. "Because you were not afraid to knock upon a closed door." "That cannot be all." He looked toward the dark horizon. "Because I thought, perhaps, if I gave you shelter, I might learn to forgive myself." "And did you?" she asked. He turned to her, his eyes soft in the lantern glow. "No," he said. "You did." The honesty of it undid her. She stepped closer, voice trembling. "Then forgive yourself now, Adrian. For the fire, for the past, for what you could not save. I would rather love a man who bears his scars than one who hides them." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek, thumb tracing the faint line of soot that never seemed to wash away completely. "You would love me still, even knowing what I've done?" "I would love you because I know what you've done, and what you still dare to become." He kissed her then, no grand passion, no performance for society, only the soft meeting of two lives that had endured more than most. The wind rose through the trees, carrying the scent of lilac and ash, and for the first time in years Wynthorpe Hall felt alive. Weeks turned to months. The rebuilt west wing shone beneath new glass and stone. Children's laughter echoed through the corridors, servants' families invited to picnic on the lawns, the Duchess's doing. London society called it eccentricity, Adrian called it grace. Each evening he found her sketching in the gallery, a candle flickering beside her. She had drawn the hall's ruins, the portraits, even him once, though he pretended not to notice. One evening he entered quietly. She was studying her own portrait. "Do you think it looks like me?" she asked without turning. "No," he said softly. "It looks like who I was meant to find." She smiled, but there was a wistfulness in it. "One day the world will forget our names." "Then let them," he murmured. "The house will remember." She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Do you ever miss the man you were before all this?" He shook his head. "He was dead. You only made it official." The clock struck midnight. A gust of wind brushed through the open window, stirring the curtains. Candlelight shimmered across the portrait's surface, and for an instant it seemed to breathe, her painted eyes alive with the same quiet fire as the woman beside him. Adrian drew her into his arms, resting his forehead against hers. "You taught me," he whispered, "that even the feared may learn to kneel." "And you taught me," she replied, "that mercy can wear a scar." Outside, thunder rolled softly beyond the hills, but within the hall there was peace, the kind born not of silence but of understanding. The world would gossip, forget, rebuild again. Yet here, in the golden hush of firelight, Two souls stood redeemed by gentleness. As the last candle flickered out, his voice broke the stillness once more. "You will hang forever on this wall," he said. "But it is I who have been captured." And somewhere in the shadows beyond the painted frame, the ghost of the old hall seemed to sigh, not in sorrow but in blessing.